corruption in our country. This is because the decree came on the heels of allegations of the disappearance of 2.8 billion naira from the coffers of a federal ministry that had been under the headship of Buhari in the previous military administration. Allegedly, Buhari had been deeply embarrassed by those allegations, and when he himself carried out a successful coup, he promulgated Decree Number 4 to deal with those sections of the press that had been most probing, most vocal about the alleged missing 2.8 billion naira. From these three cases, we can see that there is a common element, and that common element is corruption. However, unlike the corruption that we saw in both the oil subsidy scam and the Obasanjo and Atiku feud that paraded itself in broad daylight, the alleged corruption in the case of Buhari's military dictatorship was hidden, subterranean. Everyone knew it was there, and abundantly so. But you could not talk openly about it. You could not even engage in rumors about it. Moreover, in Buhari's Decree Number 4, this veil of silence and secrecy on corruption was made sublime in its impunity and brazenness. For as I have observed, the decree stated without the slightest equivocation that even if you mark of a dictatorship that is not military, but it is in fact civilian, a dictatorship that in essence is ostensibly not exercised by the gun, but through the complex mediations of corruption and mediocrity of the highest order. So, on the one hand, we have a military dictatorship that is non-elective, that is indeed that putatively bases its legitimacy on popular mandate, but is completely unembarrassed by any and all allegations of corrupt practices and dealings. Moreover, the democratic dispensation in question is so unashamed about the taint of corruption that in the particular case of the Obasanjo Atiku, it actually broadcasts to the nation and the whole world lurid details of its corruption. I would suggest that the irony in both cases is more apparent than real. Military dictatorships are characteristically very paranoid about being shown to be correct, only because nearly all military coup makers come into power on the claim that they have come to clean up the mess made by civilian governments, or even by a preceding military autocracy. In the case of the Buhari dictatorship, that was clearly the most self-righteous, the most fanatical about imposing discipline on Nigeria and Nigerians of all military governments we have ever had, it absolutely could not stand being embarrassed by the taint of corruption, especially if the allegation happened to be based on the truth. The irony in an elective democratic government that brazenly washes the dirty learnings of its oceans of corruption in the national and global public sphere is likewise a factitious irony with no basis in reality. This is because the presumption of virtually all our ruling class parties since the return to formal democratic rule in 1999 is quite simply that no party, no politician ever wins or conversely ever loses an election on the basis of a public exposure of billions and trillions that the politician or the party has looted from oil wealth. At a more general level, winning or losing elections has little or nothing to do with your performance in office. You may be as corrupt and as mediocre as the worst politician on the African continent or the world, but that is no disqualification for you to become a member of the National Assembly, the executive governor of the state, or the president of the republic itself, unless, of course, you have been caught, tried, and jailed. Please understand me. I have not come here this morning to engage in that infamous Nigeria bashing that we encounter in many parts of the world, and that is ironically a national pastime of Nigerians ourselves. And I readily accept the fact that not all our politicians and political parties are corrupt and mediocre. But I do think that the great majority of them are fundamentally predisposed to being corrupt and being mediocre. This is not because they are necessarily or inherently corrupt or mediocre. It just so happens that this is the prevailing order or system that they know. It is the universe of values and expectations in which they operate. Corruption and mediocrity reign supreme in our country at the present time because that is the game in town. It is the undeclared dictatorship which has apparently found a perfect hiding place in the outward forms and protocols of a formally democratic political order. Permit me to expatiate a little on this particular observation. Now, I think it is safe for me to assume that most of us in this gathering this morning would agree to a proposition which states that an endlessly corrupt electoral system in which massive, blatant, and violent rigging of elections plays a central role in the main reason why virtually all our political parties and politicians do not really depend on their performance in office to win elections. Another way of putting this concretely is to say that rather than actually perform well in office and win the respect and the mandate of the people, virtually all our political parties spend most of their time amassing the war chest that will enable them either to successfully rig elections or conversely to prevent successful rigging by opposing political parties and politicians. In other words, rigging does not stand alone. It is part of a vastly corrupt and corrupting political party system. Because this is a very crucial point in this lecture, I wish to be absolutely clear about what I am saying or even claiming here. For this reason, I wish to give one very concrete illustration of my claim here that rigging does not stand alone but is part of a vast network of corruption in our political party system. This illustration, I would argue, is one that most adult and politically sophisticated Nigerians know only too well. Thus, I don't think that anyone here would seriously contest the fact that as the ruling party with a so far ironclad control of the center, the PDP spends most of its time between election cycles preparing to rig itself back into power with absolutely no relevance to how it has performed in office. By contrast, the other ruling class parties not in control at the center but in the seats of power in some of the states of the Federation spend nearly all of their time between electoral cycles amassing the financial means and the strategies with which to prevent the PDP from rigging itself back into power. Nowhere is this whole apparatus of a deeply corrupt and corrupting political order more apparent than in our election tribunals, in which, as everyone knows, political parties and politicians who have more credible claims to having won elections must still bribe very heavily to secure legal redress for having been robbed of their victories through rigging at the polls. It is well known that the 2001 oil subsidy mega scam that ran into more than 2.58 trillion naira, a sum that itself was slightly more than half of the entire national budget for that year, had much to do with the re-election project of the president and the PDP in that year. But even with that dubious help, we shall never get a full measure of the sums that go into both rigging and preventing rigging by our ruling class parties. All we can safely say is that rigging about each other that should at the very least have led to the impeachment of the president and the vice president. But as I've said, nothing happened to them, and not a single one of their cronies, henchmen, and girlfriends that were beneficiaries of the loot made to pay back a single kobo. I've also said that the 2.58 trillion naira that the House of Representatives ad hoc committee on the oil subsidy mega scam of 2011 declared as the total sum that was looted. But guess what? Nobody has paid back a single kobo out of that colossal sum of 2.8 trillion naira that could make the lives of millions of Nigerians better than the horrible conditions we currently have to endure, thanks to this dictatorship of corruption and mediocrity. As a matter of fact, and with regard to this particular case of the oil subsidy scam, the whole nation, perhaps the entire world, was treated to a comedy of errors and absurdity when the chairman of that same House of Rep ad hoc committee, Honorable Farouk Lawan, was caught by a hidden video camera receiving hush money bribe from one of the biggest names among the cabal of real and fake marketers that, in collusion with public officers, perpetrated the oil subsidy mega scam of 2001. Now, as far as I know, Honorable Lawan has not faced any legislative censure for this egregiously corrupt act, and he has not lost his seniority in the currently sitting membership of the House of Representatives. All that has happened to him is that he is being tried in a court of law in which he is apparently successfully tying up the legal process in a seemingly endless impasse. Since all along this talk, I have been linking corruption and mediocrity in an undeclared dictatorship that, in my opinion, has political governance in our country at the present time in its iron grip. Let me now address this equation between corruption and mediocrity directly, hoping that by doing so, the kind of dictatorship I have in mind here will become much clearer. And I can think of no better way to illustrate this than by saying that corruption and mediocrity in our country at the present time are symbiotic. They feed off of each other. Extremely poor performance, or even no performance at all, is no barrier to getting very wealthy and holding very high public office in our country, including the highest office in the land. 2.58 trillion naira, that is the equivalent of 12.46 euros and 10.73 pounds sterling looted from the national coffers for petroleum products, the bulk of which were not supplied at all by many phantom non-existent oil marketers. But behind it all, and according to the House of Representatives ad hoc committee on the oil subsidy scam, we see, and I quote, a gross lack of record keeping, decadence, rot, and entrenched inefficiency of the public officials that supervise the payment of those vast sums to the oil market. These epithets of abysmally low standards of performance and probity were addressed to the specific case of the oil subsidy scam, but as every adult thinking Nigerian knows, they might as well have been addressed to the generation and distribution of electricity, construction of physical infrastructures like roads, bridges, hospitals and schools, public sanitation and waste disposal, social services for young people, elderly and disabled. Federal